Dementia Researcher with a blog and a rating.
When it comes to writing your thesis, it's common to be in a position where you're simultaneously writing up the same work to produce a paper for publication. This can be quite tricky because the two often require different writing styles and structures. For example, the method section in your thesis will always be far more detailed than the method section for a paper. In theory, anyone with lab competency in your field should be able to pick up your thesis and use your method section as if it were a book of step-by-step protocols. With the exception of method-specific journals like Nature Protocols or the Journal of Visual Experiments, you'll never have to write in such detail for a paper. Now, if you find yourself in this situation where you're having to write part of your thesis as a paper, it can be easy to get overwhelmed and conclude that it's not worth it. Your thesis takes priority, right? Well, yes and no. Let's forget about wider career growth for now and focus purely on getting your PhD. Yes, you do need to submit your thesis in order for your work to be assessed and vivaed. However, a key part of the viva is working out whether or not what you've done has furthered your field. Defending that is so much easier if you've published some of that work. Imagine if your assessor asks you, but how do we know that what you've done is novel? You can reply by simply saying, because it was published via peer review in Journal X. With that in mind, let's work together to summarise the key points to help you write this paper. Hopefully, the following will make things easier. Step 1 is structure. And we've talked about this a bit already. However, it's worth touching on it a bit more. Every journal is structured differently. You find most adhere to a similar structure, but there's still nuances that you need to be aware of. For example, does this journal want a combined results and discussion? Do they want methods at the end? Do I insert my figures in text or attached separately? Before you even think about writing something, work out which journal you'll submit to first. I say first because it's very common that your paper will get rejected by the first journal. So don't take this personally, it's totally normal. Either way, the website for a journal will always contain a Guide for Authors section. In here you'll find details on how they want the paper to be formatted. Once you know what sections you need to include, you can then sketch them out, ready for you to complete. It'll probably look a bit like this: title, author info, abstract, keywords, introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, author contributions, acknowledgements, and references. And if you're not sure about sections such as author contributions or acknowledgements, simply take a look at some of the papers published recently in that journal and you'll get an idea. Next up, you need to identify the core message. With your thesis, you're writing a book. When it comes to a paper, you're taking 1 to 2 chapters of that book and converting them into a jazzy summary. You're putting it into a format that will make people want to read it. The important question is, what is the core message of that part of your thesis? And it will likely differ to the overall message of your thesis in the sense that it'll be more specific. It will also be the main thing you want to get across in the title of your paper. Let me give you an example from my thesis to help here. So the title of my PhD thesis is Development of Biopolymer Hydrogels as Complex Tissue Engineering Scaffolds. There are 2 papers associated with parts of my thesis, and they tell very different stories despite falling under that same theme of growing cells in hydrogels and doing interesting things. The first paper covers a part of my thesis where I demonstrated that you can change the physical properties of a hydrogel and subsequently influence the biological responses of cells embedded within by applying sonication before you stick the cells in. Definitely don't sonicate after unless you want to kill everything. The title of the paper is very different to my thesis title. So just again, PhD title, Development of Biopolymer Hydrogels as Complex Tissue Engineering Scaffolds. Paper title, Controlling the Rheology of Gel and Gum Hydrogels in Cell Culture Conditions. The other paper covers a part of my thesis where we developed a new way to 3D bioprint tissues. Once again, PhD title, Development of Biopolymer Hydrogels as Complex Tissue Engineering Scaffolds. Paper title, Suspended Manufacture of Biological Structures. Your paper title and overall theme needs to convey the specific message you want to get across from whatever part of your thesis you're looking to publish, so make sure you do get that across. Next up, simplify. Now you've got that core concept nailed on, it's time to continue simplifying. For context, Journal articles are usually 3,000 to 8,000 words long. It needs to be concise, and you can start with your introduction. I've never written more than 2 sides of paper for an introduction. The point is to set the scene and make the work sound exciting and interesting. If you spend too much time telling the story, the message can get lost, so avoid things like long literature reviews and focus on setting the scene and getting the key messages across. When it comes to methods and results, use tables where possible to nicely summarize anything that cannot be presented in a figure. For example, primary details if you've done PCR, or summaries of quantitative data. And finally, ensure the whole thing weaves together nicely. If a paragraph starts and it just feels jarring, it's a sign that you're missing a nice transition sentence that links to the previous passage. Next up, get feedback, submit, and revise. So once you've got a draft, send it to every author that you've named to get their opinion. This might seem like a lot of work or overkill, but nobody likes to be blindsided by a paper they haven't seen prior to submission. Also, the more eyes on it at this point, the better. Get as much feedback as you can before creating a final draft. Submit, wait for the reviewer feedback, and revise if required. This process can be laborious, and some clients can seem harsh, but don't take it personally. It's part of the process, and your paper will be stronger afterwards. You're now one step closer to the final step, which is to celebrate. This is the most important step in my mind. Once you've been through peer review and finally got that paper accepted, make sure you celebrate. Do this for every paper you publish. Less than 1% of people across the globe can say they published a scientific paper. It's an incredibly significant thing that we so often take for granted in our publish or perish insane culture. So celebrate because you've earned it.
Thank you for listening. Join the Dementia Research bloggers and share your own views.